The problem is that most guys at somewhere along the line realize that the rules that they've been told, or the game they have been told to play, is ineffective. It doesn't work for them. And they get frustrated, or they don't understand why. What makes one man really, really sexy doesn't necessarily make him a good father. And what makes this guy a really good father over here, or a good investment for a long-term security, isn't as sexy or as inviting or as fun and exciting as the guy who's the bad boy. I can hug him and I can be emotional with this guy and everything, but he's not fun and he's not exciting. But when I want him there, he's dutiful and he's loyal, and he would probably make a great dad, but he's just not as hot as the guy that she wants to keep getting with.
But it's more important to have the online brand, and that's kind of like a new indication for a position in the hierarchy, right?
Exactly.
And to me, this is an attack on competence. That's how I see it.
Yeah, in a way, I think I agree with you. I see that as well. Who is the alpha? Superman or Batman? Or Captain America or Iron Man? Who's the alpha of those?
Good evening, Slovenia. Good afternoon, America. My name is Ernecl. The guy's name on my right is Tadej Prezelj, and our star guest today is Rollo Tomassi. Rollo Tomassi has been called the godfather of the red pill. He's been a permanent fixture in the manosphere for 20 years with a focus on evolutionary psychology and objectivism. Rollo brings a pragmatic nuts and bolts approach to intersexual dynamics, men and women's innate natures and their effects on today's society. He's the author of the internationally best-selling book series, The Rational Male. Published in 2013, the series' first book, The Rational Male, has become the Bible of the red pill, positively impacting and saving men's lives worldwide. But who's Rollo privately?
Is that what we're going to find out today?
Hopefully. I should let my friend Tadej Prezelj introduce himself. He is going to be my co-host for the first time. Let us all be gentle towards him because he's making a debut. So today, who are you?
So yeah, Lesh, thanks again so much for the invitation, for this opportunity. Thanks to Rollo for accepting the invitation. It's really an honor and a pleasure to have such a guest here, and that you gave me the opportunity to have a debut in such a way. This is my first time, as you said, but I have been interested in such topics for the past 2-3 years, such as feminism, sex differences between men and women. I actually started to listen firstly to psychoanalytic perspective. Then I was interested much more in evolutionary biology. I'm originally a graphics designer. I have a degree from visual communications, but I'm also planning to have a switch, or to also have an education from such topics that we will discuss today. I'm planning to do a master thesis on sex differences. Hopefully the university will let me do that. I'm looking forward to have a great discussion with you two guys, and that audience will learn hopefully something new, and maybe us as well. So yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Rollo, I remember when I was a young boy, I don't remember I was taught anything like that, but my persuasion was that women are some things that just want to be pampered, that are very emotional, and they want to be loved. And if you love them and if you pamper them and so forth, I guess they'll be faithful to you and so on. But this is not to be true, is it?
Not entirely. I think a lot of guys, we grow up and, we make a distinction and we use the analogy of the red pill versus the blue pill. Of course, that's an analogy that comes from the Matrix movies, right? Where we have a society, we have people, we have men in this case, when we're talking about intersexual dynamics, and I'm talking about the red pill per se. It's usually from the perspective that we are brought up in with this expectation or this understanding of how best to get a girlfriend, right? How best to go about courting a girl, right? We used to call it courtship, right? Or it was how best to have some sort of game or some sort of like what's the methodology for a young man to get with a young woman, and usually it's based on really deductive problem solving for most guys, which is A plus B equals C. It's like just deductive reasoning. So if I want to get with a girl and I want to have a girlfriend, I want to have sex with her, I want to be intimate with her, or whatever that ends up looking like, men tend to be problem solvers. We're deductive problem solvers. And so what we do is we go in, the most direct route, which is, well, that girl has something that I want. I must poll and I must find out the secret of woman, right? And I must go and find out what it is that women want in a guy, and therefore exemplify those qualities so that I can become more attractive to that woman. And so what usually that is you got to be nice to her. You got to be her friend. You got to be, and it's usually this, they'll ask their mom, they'll ask their sister, they'll ask their girlfriends, how do I, or they'll watch social media these days. And they will collect this information. And from that information, they will sort of form this idea or this method of how best to go from being single and sexless to being in a relationship or getting a girlfriend, having sex with her, and eventually forming a family at some point. And the problem is that process is fundamentally flawed, because it's like the hunter asking the deer how best to catch the deer. And it's just in the asking of that question and the actual, the process that goes along with that. It tends to be, well, first of all, it's flawed, particularly now in the 21st century, and we have more access to information about why and how it's flawed. But men tend to develop this belief set, or they develop this their personalities around how best to get a girlfriend, how best to get a wife, how best to treat women. And it's usually informed by society. It's informed by popular culture. It's informed by certainly the internet, popular music, popular movies. It's this narrative. It's what's called memes, like real memes, like memetics, meaning ideas that seem like they would be turned into good practices. But the problem is that most guys at somewhere along the line realize that the rules that they've been told, or the game they have been told to play, is ineffective. It doesn't work for them. And they get frustrated, or they don't understand why. I've always been told that the best way to go about this is, A plus B equals C. Now I'm finding out that it doesn't really work that way for me. Now I've got to go online and I've got to figure out how this really works. So the red pill and the blue pill is kind of like young men playing by one set of rules, like one rule book that no one else is using. And it's a sort of this process of understanding that, nobody's using these old sets of rules anymore. What are the rules? And that can come sooner or can come later in a man's life. Hopefully it's going to come sooner so that you can make good decisions, and you can actually be red pill aware. You can use elements of what we call game or intersexual dynamics, or understanding your nature as a man and understanding women's nature as women, and then forming what we call predictive frameworks, right? Like, how can I go about getting to that point and successfully solving my reproductive problem eventually, as a result of this new information. So that's really sort of the difference between, like, say, your blue pill way of thinking, like you were saying before. You were brought up, be nice to her, be your friend, friends first, develop this sort of sincerity and this rapport and this comfort and this familiarity. And the problem is that's anti-seductive. It's almost exactly the opposite of what you need to do to inspire genuine desire, inspire arousal, have some sort of game that leaves an emotional impact on her. And you're not going to get that from mainstream society. And so when guys take the red pill, per se, like they're unplugging from the matrix, it can be a shock to the system sometimes, because they believed and they built a life based on this old way of thinking or this old rule set. And now they're discovering that was not everything that they built. Like maybe they developed their whole personality around it, or maybe they went to a certain school because of that, or maybe they're in they're only dating girls in their region or their religion or through family, and they just don't understand why women aren't actually responding to what they should be responding to. And so it's kind of like a rude awakening for these guys. And so that can be a rough transition, going from, oh, they don't really like the nice guy, they really like the bad boy. And so therefore they've got to say, okay, well, what is it about the bad boy that makes him attractive? From that, you can build predictive frameworks as to how to best go about like learning game and becoming, learning more about yourself as well, but becoming something that is not formed or molded by that old set of rules, if that makes sense.
For the majority of my life, I had this funny thing about women, that I would fall in love only with those that didn't explicitly or at first sight sexually attract me. Was I sick because of that? You know what I mean? I made this distinction as in women for sex and women for love, sort of say. So I would tend to platonically fall in love in women. That doesn't mean that my girlfriends didn't later on sexually attract me, but if a woman would attract me sexually at first sight, I would just not be able to fall in love with her. How sick was I?
How sick were you? I think that a lot of guys, you have to remember, like, women's mating strategies and men's mating strategies differ a lot. And today, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. When you were mentioning before, there are differences between, like, sexual differences, like binary differences. Men and women are different. We are not blank slates. Social constructionism is a lie. We have distinct genetic and personality and neurological differences that prompt us as men and as women to different mating strategies. And one of the things is that for women, it's what we call hypergamy. Okay, so it's alpha seed and beta need. They're looking for the bad boy, fun, sexual, short-term genetic benefits with the guy who is the hottest guy that she can get a hold of. And then there's the good dad, right? Then there's the beta bucks, what we call the beta bucks, the provisioning. It's the 3 Ps. It's provisioning, protection, and parental investment. And that's the good dad. He's the good long-term investment, but he's not as exciting and not as fun as the guy who she met in college and she had a really good time with in Cancun on spring break, right? So you've got those two, kind of that paradox. But what women are really looking for is they're looking for a good combination of the both of them, but they don't really expect to find that in the same man, because what makes one man really, really sexy doesn't necessarily make him a good father. And what makes this guy a really good father over here, or a good investment for long-term security, isn't as sexy or as inviting or as fun and exciting as the guy who's the bad boy, who takes risks and has sort of dark triad personality traits. So there's this kind of this paradox between cads and dads. For men, our mating strategy, our innate mating strategy, centers on 2 things: unlimited access to unlimited sexuality. And men tend to, barring any obstacle, barring any kind of filtering mechanism, anything that would limit men from doing that, if men could do it, they would have unlimited access to unlimited sexuality. The only criteria most men have for women, at least initially, is she's got to be hot and she's got to be available. Those are really the only 2 things. From there, you can build things up and layer things on. Now, most men can't can't realize that. They can't that's not actionable to them, because 80% of men are considered unattractive by women. So that's how we get the Pareto principle, right? The 80-20 rule. So you've got 80%, and some guys would argue with me and say it's like 90%, but let's just go with 80-20 because it's easier to remember at this point. But the vast majority of guys are selected out, or they have to figure some way to get around the fact that they're not as attractive, or they've got to find some sort of adaptation or make themselves more attractive, make themselves more arousing, get into the gym, make more money, find some way to status, find something else to make up for the deficit that woman does. Like the average woman doesn't want to get with the average man. She wants to get with a guy who is above average. And we see this played out day in and day out on the internet right now when it comes to social media. Women have an expectation of a man who is at least a little bit marginally better than she is on the sexual marketplace. That's equality between the sexes in the sexual marketplace doesn't work for women, because they're looking for the bigger and the better deal at all times. So if you're one of the 80% of guys, you've got to find a strategy. You've got to figure a way first of all, how do I compete with all the rest of these 80%ers? And then second of all, how do I push myself up into the 20%ers so that I can at least be considered attractive enough for a woman to want to go out with me and possibly have sex with me and possibly form a family later on? And that's what inspires guys to certain things like, oh, I got to be nice to her. How do I set myself apart from the rest of these guys? Well, it seems like a good idea to say, well, I'm going to get a lot of money. I'm going to get a good job. I'm going to get a good education. I'm going to prove that I'm going to be a really good long-term provider for this woman that woman may or may not, depending on where she is in life, have any use for at that point. So what happens is when you're saying, well, how wrong was I? You're only wrong in not understanding the difference between like the guy that she wants to, like the alpha seed versus the beta need, the guy who is the hot, fun guy that she wants to have sex with. She has genuine desire to have sex with this guy validationally. And then there's the guy who she has sex with transactionally. Those are the guys who are the providers. Those are the guys who have some sort of provisioning. And his primary attraction factor is what he's made of himself, as opposed to the guy who's just hot and she just wants to have sex, but she just has the genuine, physiological arousal and attraction to that guy. And so what happens is when guys get into trouble, it's usually the belief that what women really want is this nice guy. They really want the guy who is fun and familiar and comfortable and, and has this, he becomes like a sort of a stuffed animal, at the end of the bed, right? He's just, I can hug him and I can be emotional with this guy and everything, but he's not fun and he's not exciting. But when I want him there, he's dutiful and he's loyal and he would probably make a great dad, but he's just not as hot as the guy that she wants to keep getting with. And that, again, takes place over the course of a woman's life, say from 18 to about 28 years old. And so your guys get confused during that time because they believe that it's really about money and status and love and loyalty and commitment and generosity and humor and all of these sort of ephemeral like reasons why a woman would want to be attracted to you. But there's a difference, and what you're probably getting at here is you don't understand the difference between arousal and attraction. So if you ask a woman, what is it that you want in a man? She was more likely to give you all of these characteristics that all represent long-term security to her. So that's the attraction side of the equation. If you say, what do you like in a man physically? That's the arousal side. He's got to be 6 feet tall. He's got to have a nice V taper. He has to look like he works out. He's got to have a symmetrical face. He's got to have a good jawline. He has to look masculine. He's got to have a nice butt, and he's got to have big arms or whatever. And there has to be some sort of physical arousal. That's different than what makes a guy attractive. So when it comes to arousal, it's sort of short-term genetic benefits, like he looks like somebody whose babies I want to have. And then the other side is, well, he looks like he would be invested in the babies I would have with him and in the long term. So those are really the two sides. And what happens is when guys make up strategies for themselves or adaptations, they tend to focus on one or the other. And it sounds to me like, Alesh, that you focused primarily on the good dad side, on the good provider side, as if that was going to be your trump card at some point with whatever woman that you ended up with.
Obviously. Today, any questions?
Well, I just want to add that actually, yeah, it's a bit confusing because I think from the moral perspective that if you're going to be a good dad and if you take risks and work hard, right, even in your 20s, that's actually being an alpha male rather than a beta male, because those beta males today in my generations, they're being nice and kind and they say hello to everyone and they communicate with everyone, but they don't have, with that agreeableness, there's no hierarchical values, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's like they don't care for that because everything they do is in accordance to the online brand. So everything you do in the real world is actually for the online brand. And it's actually, I see that it's not even that important to have sex, but it's more important to have the online brand. And that's kind of like a new indication for a position in the hierarchy, right?
Exactly.
And there's no this competence. I see it as an attack on competence, not just from the ideological perspectives, from feminism and postmodernism and all that, but there's also the technology on social media, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where your profiles on Instagram, your followers, that's not an indication necessarily for competence, but that's what women want, right? That's what
it's perceived as competence.
Yeah.
It's easy it's becoming an easy cue to fake in the digital age.
It's a persona, yeah.
Clout is easy to manufacture in 2022, and I'm glad you brought that up because I in the beginning of my fourth book, which is The Rational Male Religion, I talk about how we're involved in it right now in the hustle economy, where it's like somebody's selling you a book, they're selling you a program, they're selling you something. If you are online and you have a social media account, I don't care if you're 90 years old or you're 12 years old, if you're on Instagram, you're your own brand. It's the brand of me. And what's happened is we've taken that sort of dynamic, that hustle economy dynamic, and we've applied it to the dating. We've applied it to the digital sexual marketplace. And I made the point in the book is that dating in the 21st century is all brand management.
Yeah.
It's all it's curating your pictures on Instagram, by the way, is the #1 dating app on planet Earth right now. It's not Tinder, it's not Hinge, it's not Bumble, it is Instagram. Because you meet a girl in a club, wherever you are, what's the first thing they do? It's not, can I get your phone number? It's follow me on Instagram so that we can talk now. It used to be back in the day, can I get your phone number and I'll call you back? And that was a measure of success for pickup artists back in the early 2000s. Today, that's completely out the window because nobody cares about your number. They want to know if you're cool enough to hang out with by looking at your pictures and your imagery. And again, like you said, the perception of status, the perception of social proof, the perception of pre-selection for a guy or for a woman for that matter, just by looking at your imagery and what your posts are and how cool you are and who are the people you hang out with and do you have a cute dog, that kind of stuff. So it's all about curating your brand as a dating person, as a single person in the 21st century.
Yeah, exactly. Because again, right, you can ask her for a Instagram. I'll give my Instagram, right? But then she will judge how popular I am on Instagram, and then is another judgment decision, whether he's worried or not. Because if you have, I don't know, 200 followers, that's nothing. You're not popular. You're not in a position in the hierarchy, right?
Little blue check. Are you certified? Yeah.
Yeah. So, but to me, this is an attack on competence. That's how I see it.
Yeah, in a way, I think I agree with you. I see that as well. It's an attack on competence, but it's an attack in the sense that it's too easy to manufacture or to produce the perception that you do have competence or that you do have fame or clout or however you want to call it. But it's the idea like you didn't have to earn. So yeah, I would definitely agree with that. But again, perception is everything, especially when you're trying to make an emotional impact on women. And as you said, if you've only got 200 followers and you don't have the little blue check mark or whatever it is, you're not certified on Instagram or Twitter or whatever it is, then you're not as cool as a guy who has 40,000 followers. Yeah. And, you've got 4 books out and you've got videos out and you play in a band or whatever. Right?
Yeah, but the problem is that
you're not cool enough.
That you then gain opportunities with more followers. And the condition from that is you need to be nice to everyone, right? You need to be nice and kind, and people will go and follow you, right? And that's how you'll gain followers and likes and so on. And that's what I think that there's so much beta males and nice guys and so on, right? And if you're disagreeable, well, I'm a disagreeable person, I think, and then
let me ask you this, because I don't know how familiar we were talking before we came on the air here. I know you haven't read my book, but let me just ask you this question, anyways. When we're talking about like what's an alpha male and what's a beta male, I really kind of want to dig into that. I've got a 5th book that's on the way right now, and I kind of talk about that quite a bit throughout the book. And the comparison I make is that I think a lot of people make the sort of misperception that the beta male, or excuse me, the alpha male guy is the leader of men, right? He's he goes to church on Sunday, and he has a good job, or maybe he owns his own business and he's in control. He's the master of his own world, kind of thing. And he's still, good looking and everything, but he's still pro-social, right? He's a good member of society. And I think we get a little confused as to what alpha is, because alpha is not so much like that status. It is the mindset that you go into your sort of life, how you approach life in general. So the comparison I give is this. You've got to be familiar with like the Marvel movies or superheroes, right? So,
okay.
Yeah. What I'd say is this. Okay. So who is, of these 2 superheroes, who is the alpha? Superman or Batman? Or Captain America or Iron Man? Who is the alpha of those? I
guess Iron Man.
You think Iron Man is, right? Okay, so Iron Man is the alpha. What about Batman and Superman? Who's the alpha between those 2?
Then it should be Batman.
Batman. Okay, so what you've just done is you've given me what your impression of alpha male is, and those are sort of the dark triad, maverick. Does it alone, does it by his own rules, and it's kind of he's the bad boy, right? Yeah. So Batman and Iron Man are essentially the same character if you think about it, because they're both multimillionaires and they rely on their wits. They don't have any superpowers, right? But they, like Iron Man, for example, like he's a womanizer, right? Especially in the beginning. Well, if you know anything about the Marvel character, but especially in the beginning, he's nailing girls all the time, man. That's his attitude, and he's just sort of this does it on his own kind of guy, but he's still alpha male, right? Then you've got Superman and you've got Captain America. Those guys are also alpha, but they're alpha in a pro-social way, where they're interested in the society. They're interested in upholding standards and values and virtues, right? So you've got the virtuous alpha male who, Superman has superpowers, right? So he can be Superman, but he's also concerned with moral goodness and pro-social ideas. He's still alpha, but he's alpha in a different way than, say, Tony Stark or Iron Man, right? Or Bruce Wayne, Batman. So you've got two different archetypes, but they're both alpha males that women want to get with, but they both represent something that women have a use for at one point in their life, and then they have no use for at another point in their life. So maybe they want to get with the bad boy dark triad guy like Batman or Iron Man when they're young and they're hot and they're 18 to 28 years old. And then later, when they get to be about 28, 29, 30, that's when they start looking for Captain America. And that's when they start looking for Superman, because that guy represents security. He's still alpha. He's still probably really fun in bed, and he's really ripped and he looks good, but he's also, has some moral, upstanding status that goes along with that. So the reason I use those comparisons when we're talking about what's an alpha and what's not an alpha is most guys have some sort of mental, and women, by the way, have some mental image of what an alpha ought to be. And I always say this, is that alpha, when it comes to men, is a mindset. It is not a demographic, meaning it's not like a certain archetype. So there are guys who are alpha, who are leaders of business and industry, and maybe they're in the military and they wear a nice uniform and yes sir, and those guys are alpha male, officer and a gentleman, right? They're alpha males. And then there's the guys who are in prison. And those guys are just as alpha, but they are alpha in an antisocial way rather than a pro-social way. So you've got that dark triad personality traits, and I know you know about the big five and all that stuff. So narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism, right, as the dark triad traits. That's more, to greater or lesser degree, that's Batman and Iron Man. Still sexy, still brooding, still he does things his own way, and still a guy that women want to get with and other men want to be, but in a different way than, say, Captain America and Superman, because those are different archetypes, still alpha. But what happens is most guys think that the only way, and women, of course, too, usually tell me one of those characters before the other one. Because it's if I'm asking a woman who's like 34 years old, she's going to tell me Captain America. If I ask a woman who's like 23 years old, she's going to say, I want to get with Iron Man. He's really sexy, right? So there's like different like priorities at different times of life for women there. But
perception changes.
The long and the short of it is that we tend to focus on what we think we can most closely align ourselves with. And so when I say, an alpha male can be, the leader of your church, or it can be a politician, or it can be the boss that you have, your supervisor at work, or your military, whatever. That can be an alpha. But there's just as many alpha males in prison that were gang members and, drug dealers and, tribal warlords, or whatever you want to call them. Those guys are just as alpha as the guys who are upstanding pro-social members of society. And that really throws that narrative into sort of disarray for people, because they just have this one concept or this other concept. And what they don't boil it down to is that alpha is not being an asshole dark triad, gang leader. And it's not always being an upstanding member of society and being Superman. It can be both. But what happens is, for both of those archetypes, you have to have that same alpha mentality. And that's what it distills down to.
Yeah, so the perception actually changes through time when the sexual market value declines, right?
Right.
So the perception then from a woman that's 30 years old, the perception of alpha changes. Yeah.
That's what I wrote about in my second book called Preventive Medicine. When I wrote the first book, everybody asked me, and they said, "Oh, Rollo, I wish I would have had this sooner. I wish I would have had this before I got divorced, or I made so many decisions that I would have changed had I had all this information available to me." And when should I give this book to my son so he doesn't make the same mistakes as I did? And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to write a book that has a timeline in it. And what are the basic things that men can expect from women at different stages of like maturity? Like, so between the ages of, say, like 15 and 24, and then 24 to 29. This basically this timeline and how those priorities shift. So as I was saying, between 18 and 28, that girl's probably interested in Tony Stark, or the outlaw bad boy, the rapper, the athlete, the rock star. And then when she's sort of exiting the sexual marketplace right around 28, 29, when she realizes she can't compete in to the same level of athleticism, right? And she's not necessarily hit the wall physically, but certainly hit the wall mentally. Right around 29, 30, 31, that's when women start to want to consolidate on Superman or on Captain America. They still want that guy, but the priorities shift. I need security above. He doesn't have to be as hot as security is above hotness in the list. It's still very important. It might be number 2, but security, long-term provisioning, and looking towards the future for wanting to build a family, that becomes a higher priority than like, let's go, like you only live once, let's go have sex in the foam cannon party in Cancun.
But isn't it something twisted about women wanting or being attracted towards basically bad people sometimes?
Evil is sexy. Yes, you're right. The devil is sexy. Don't you know that? You guys don't watch Lucifer, the TV show Lucifer? I thought that was interesting. Lucifer's been out, like it's on Netflix, right? But I'm fascinated by the show because I know what the graphic novel it was based on, but the actor Tom Ellis, the guy who plays Lucifer Morningstar throughout the series, he's like, he has this cult pun intended, has this cult following of women who just they would love to nothing more than to have one night of sex with the guy. And I want to say he was voted like sexiest man alive by People magazine one of those years. And I'm looking at this and I'm looking at just this fawning fan club of women that are and he's a good looking guy. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I completely understand. But he does play the devil. He is literally Lucifer. And women say, I don't care. I want to have a relationship like he has with the female lead on the show. And that's a fantasy for them because those dark triad traits, even in the most extreme, being here's the literal devil is on the show, and he's sexy and he's funny and he's witty and he's got charm and everything else that goes along with that. Maybe he's not so bad after all. I could tame him. I could turn him good, and that's the sexiness and the attraction and the appeal. So yeah, but like Alesh, like why do you think that's like bad? Why do you think that's a bad thing?
Probably because I have this, Christian moral landscape as a platform of thinking. I don't know. That's probably why majority of men in the West are ill-equipped.
Well, they're ill-equipped to deal with the reality of what, like today was saying, is like the internet and our access to information now, and we have this global connectivity and the information and the data, and like I quote research all the time. I quote stats. Generally it's about like intersexual dynamics, and I'm not like I don't have a doctorate in this. I have a very 20-year background in it, but I never went to school for this. You could do this as easily as I can. Like the data is out there. And it's unignorable today. And I think that what that does is it sort of conflicts against like people who are like, I was raised Christian, right? I how can this be like, these women are immoral and they don't understand this. And it's, we could say it's men's fault or it's men's responsibility, however you want to, assign the blame. The fact is that that doesn't change the data. It doesn't change the numbers. It doesn't change the impulse and what those numbers imply. And I think that that's really where a lot of guys who have a strong ethical Christian religion, whatever it is, any kind of Islam for all I care, but like that moral conviction gets challenged every day by every new data set that says, here it is. How are you going to process this? And I don't think guys are ready to really kind of process that information, particularly when it conflicts with deeply held convictions of morality, of religion, of whatever else that they've been taught and said that, well, women are this way. And then that's part of their sort of upbringing about understanding women. And then they find out that the women, even the Christian women or the women who are part of their, convictions aren't that way. And so now they're kind of in strange lands, right? They're in strange, like it's a new strange waters. They don't know where how to navigate those things. And we're still in the process. I think a lot of guys are still in the process of figuring that out.
This is
okay. Yeah, I just want to say that he was mentioning a lot about dark triad, and there's actually a study that about Tinder, the dating app, so that the people in the dark triad are dominating the Tinder sphere. So it's actually it's above the Pareto distribution actually. So
I'm sure
it's only the 4% of guys that are attractive to women, and it's actually the dark triad.
Yeah,
dark triad people. So
yeah, I have that. Do I have the data set somewhere? I
think it's like saying they like only 4% of men, while men are liking 60% of women. So
yeah, it's true. It's here. I just found it.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I think this. I believe this is is the study you were talking about today. Is that studies of online dating find that most men find most women at least somewhat attractive. In contrast, women view 80% of men as below average in attractiveness. Men liked more than 60% of female profiles, while women liked only 4.5% of male profiles. So there's some real So when you're dealing with that kind of information all the time, that's a real kick in the face sometimes when you're trying to figure out, like, well, is it a moral issue, or is it because that's just simply the way women are built? And how do you process that? How do you deal with that? Especially in a global sexual marketplace. We're not just talking about like women in in Slovenia, right? We're talking about all over the world because it's a worldwide thing. It's a Tinder or whatever, your dating profiles, the aggregate information is global.
What about okay, this is the call to speculation. What about Middle Eastern? We have, I don't know, basically, but we have this intuition that Middle Eastern men and women are different than us. That it's somehow different to live as a man and as a woman in the Middle East, as a Muslim and so forth. Do you think that that the laws there are different or just distorted because women don't get to decide as much as in the West?
Mm-hmm. It's funny you should bring that up because this morning, morning for him anyways, but actually for me it was about 1:00 in the afternoon today. I had about a 3-hour long talk with this guy. His name, he's a Muslim man. His name is Coach. He goes by Coach Kareem, and I've done panel shows with him and my good friend Abu American Craig, who I quote in my book, in the fourth book. He was sort of my Muslim, let's just say, advisor on that book. I had like a Jewish advisor. I had Christian advisors. I had Sikh advisors. I had Krishna advisors. I had like Mormon advisors. I had a lot of people who wanted to have some sort of give me some answer questions for me. But so I did a show with him, and we talked about exactly that just today. So I'll relate to you what we talked about. I think there's this conception that like certain cultures are either immune or they're being assimilated by like gynocentrism and feminism and this female empowerment like narrative. There's a belief that those cultures are slower, or else they're immune to it, right? And I think the more kind of invested you are in your religion or your religious convictions, the more resistant you are to the idea that your religion could in some way be compromised by the women who are actually part of your religion as well. And so we talk about this all the time, and I argued about this in my fourth book. I made the assertion that pretty much every religion, every old order religion today, including Orthodox religions, is slowly being assimilated by feminism and gynocentrism, and by essentially making women the most like female correctness, I guess. Like the female experience becomes the correct experience. And as a result, what that does is it fundamentally changes the nature of those faiths. So within a generation or maybe 2 generations, as a result of this global expansion of this really westernized feminism, and the importance of putting women into positions of power. If you look at women in the IMF or the European Monetary Fund or the World Bank, or who's in control of the Fed, or who is controlling the purse strings in various countries, you'll see that it is overwhelmingly female these days. And that's sort of like, people don't really want to pay it. You don't see that in the news because they don't want to make a big deal out of it. But since really about 2012 to where we're at right now, about in the last 10 years, we have replaced the men in those positions of economic control, I should say, with women. And so how do women govern? How do women influence society through that, through money and everything else? Well, that's one aspect of that globalizing feminism and gynocentrism that I talk about all the time. The other aspect is how is that affecting, how is the what I call the fempowerment narrative, female empowerment, how is that affecting our culture? How is that affecting our reproductive rights, our reproductive interests? How is that? It affects so many different aspects of human society. And one of those, of course, is religion. And so we tend to look, I think, at certainly Latin cultures, like Latin cultures, and I would say Muslim cultures right now. We tend to look at them as more patriarchal, or they're the last holdouts of patriarchy. And so we had this very long discussion about that. And I think that there's this perception that that those societies are immune to this. But yet, if you go and you look at, statistically speaking, like a lot of the more affluent Islamic cultures, such as like Saudi Arabia, even to a lesser extent, say Iran, even Muslims in Western societies, like say in the UK or they're in the United States, definitely you can see day by day the influence, the global influence of female empowerment in the women who subscribe to that faith or subscribe to that, that culture. And how does that affect how does that female empowerment affect the family? How does that affect the men? How does that affect the sexual marketplace from within those ethnicities and that culture? And there's this idea, I think, that men are more masculine in Islamic cultures, or black men are more alpha than white men, or Latino men are more alpha than white men, but they're not as alpha as black men. And so we have this sort of we have this sort of it's all very hierarchical understanding of who ought to be on top and who's more old school and who's more red pill naturally. And I make the argument is that it's not an ethnic thing, it's not a racial thing, it's not even a religious thing. It's a man thing versus a woman thing. And I think that we don't do ourselves any favors by thinking that, the men in my culture know how to do it. Well, yeah, they do for this generation. Maybe in the next generation or the generation that comes after that, you might not recognize what your religion really looks like. So when we talk about like Muslim men, we think of them as being very controlling. We think of them as being very in control of their women, and women are innately, naturally submissive to those men because they still have that patriarchy is part of, those Abrahamic religions. And so we can talk about Judaism, we can talk about Christianity, but when we look at Muslim cultures, they seem to be sort of like the last holdout. And when I explored this in my fourth book, I was talking about how mate guarding amongst Muslim men it's a religious imperative, not just a cultural imperative. It's a religious imperative. So when I look at how Muslim men and Muslim women interact with one another, and a Muslim woman in strictly Orthodox Islamic cultures are not allowed to go outside without a male escort, for example, or they have to wear a burqa, or if they don't have to wear a burqa, then they got to wear a hijab, right? There's two, and we call it modesty, but really what it is it is an effort at mate guarding. I don't want any other man looking at my woman, but she's got to go to the marketplace. Okay, wear this, burlap sack and go down to the marketplace and get what we need for food and then come back, or I will escort you down there, kind of thing. And I think we look at the most extreme cases, but the long and the short of it is that culturally, religiously, a lot of what would benefit men is sort of written into the religious code. You're going to see that being, I think, really within the next one or two generations. I think you're going to see that challenged, if not now, because I can see Instagram videos today of women in Iran who are flagrantly just taking up the hijab and they're listening to some rap music and they're dancing and stuff like that, all risking their lives because they know if they get found out, the theocracy that is Iran, they'll send the cops to your front door and they'll take you away, right? That's one example. Another example is I think it was in Ireland there was Ireland or these former Catholic countries where I know definitely it was Ireland, where abortion became legal. And you see this big celebration for abortion becoming on-demand, abortion being legalized in what was formerly a very Catholic, very conservative, very strict, Irish Catholic culture, right? it's gone. And what happens is we have this big party and everybody gets down and they dance and they love on it. But that celebration is not just in Ireland. It's all over the world. You'll see celebrations in Argentina who did exactly the same thing. Formerly a very Catholic country, taken over by a feminist government, and then abortion is made legal, and they have a huge party. So if you have like these countries where now, if they made abortion legal in like Saudi Arabia, the celebration wouldn't just be in Dubai; it would be everywhere else in the world. And so that's really what I'm talking about. It's not just like individual cultures, it's a worldwide sort of global monoculture that is based on the empowerment of women.
This is exactly what pisses me off about the so-called mainstream right-wing critique of Islam. For example, they politicians would say, yes, they don't share our Christian values or Western values and so forth and so forth. And when you go
you're right.
to find out what are these values, is basically libertine values, not Christian values.
Communitarian, egalitarian, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll tell you the reason for you. I can give you like again, this is from my fourth book, but I make the case that one of the reasons why we see the rise of socialism, especially in the United States, which formerly would have ran people who would suggest being like democratic socialists, they would have put them in jail in the 60s, right? In the 50s and the 60s. Communism, hell, we went to wars in different countries to sort of like fight communism, and now we're embracing it here in the United States. What changed in the last 60 years that would make that even a good idea to anyone? And I will argue this is that we've put women into positions of power, and it seems like a good idea to women whose innate way of thinking about organizing society is based on communitarianism. For men, it's on hierarchies. So for men tend to think hierarchically, right? There's the colonel and the captain and the lieutenant and the corporal and then the sergeant and then the private and whatever. It's very hierarchical organization, and we see that played out across all kinds of different organizations, like for instance, like certainly sports teams, and we look at like businesses. There's always the president of the company and the vice president of the company, and then the CFO or whatever, and on down who has the most power. Men tend to organize socially according to hierarchies. Women, on the other hand, tend to be more communal or communitarian because they were the berry pickers, right? They were the ones who were the hunters and gatherers. Women were the gatherers, and they had to rely on each other because there's strength in numbers for nurturing the children, and it takes a village to raise a kid. And it was much more like women have their psychology is much more oriented around redistribution, equal redistribution. They've done these studies where it's like they've given a group of men like X amount of dollars or X amount of like resources or whatever, and women the same. And they have a group of women and a group of men, and the men tend to distribute the money or the resources or whatever according to like what your performance was. So if Alesh did a really good job, he gets $10, right? And Tadej, you get $5 because you did a pretty good job. And Rollo, you're okay. I'll just give you a couple bucks or $3. You did all right. It's based on the competency and the hierarchy and who did the best job. So that's how status is arranged. For the women, it was one for you and 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 one for you. Oh, Jenny, you're pregnant now, so you're going to get 2 because you got a baby coming. One for you and one for you. And so it ends up becoming this sort of communitarian ideal way, which is more egalitarian, which is based really on like social constructs. But when we look at how women organize society, you can see how communitarianism that is sort of instinctive to women becomes socialism. And it later becomes communism, or becomes this redistribution of wealth. That is a female concept of organizing society, whereas for men it becomes more hierarchical. And what we're saying is, as we have empowered women over the past 60 years, it's no shock. It shouldn't be a shock to anybody that socialism and liberalism in the colleges and everything that we were just talking about a little bit before shouldn't be shocking to you, because we've put so many women into positions of power that's how they rule. That's how they organize society.
Yeah. But isn't that interfering with the evolutionary mechanisms. If you look into hierarchies, right?
Hmm?
So if we want men on higher positions, and we want men that they select each other's competence. So the actual hierarchy is also not just based on competence, but based on the moral superiority, because I deserve the position in the hierarchy. So if this is if women now are organizing the hierarchy, how is that?
The problem is that they're not organizing a hierarchy. You're thinking in terms of male terms, which I would expect from you because you're male, right?
But isn't it the responsibility of men to select men that women select, right?
Right.
Because men are organizing themselves into hierarchies. So then the hypergamy comes. But it's interfering with all the fempowerment and all of that.
Yes.
So I'm concerned not just in the cultural sense, but in a biological or evolutionary sense. So because even we have data as well about testosterone and declining and all of that. So I think this is not just bad for us in terms of culture, right? But in terms of evolution. So I think that we are making a switch of direction. So I don't know what's your thoughts about that.
Okay, so first of all, I think when we make references to like sort of moral superiority or moral, you make moral appeals or ethical appeals, whatever. When men do that, we have a different approach to that than women do. So for men, it's like, well, we tend, like I said, innately, naturally, men want to form hierarchies because we want to say who's the president and who's the vice president and on down the line, right? And so we have this sort of chain of command in all kinds, and in just the way of our thinking. So when we look at like how businesses used to be, this is a good example here. Maybe I can answer your question with this quick example. Is before the sexual revolution, before the hormonal birth, the pill, right? Before hormonal birth control, a lot of the businesses that were started, like say in the first part of the 20th century, they were formed. Like you look at the Ford Motor Company, or you look at some of the companies that are still, some of them are still around today. But if you look at companies, the big companies that were formed, the businesses that were formed in the United States during that time, they were formed by men, and primarily it was men in the workforce. And that was supposed to be one of the big triumphs of feminism, is that we're going to get women into the workforce and we're going to open it up to women and more opportunities and more, opportunities for advancement and equality of opportunity as opposed to equality of outcome, right?
Right.
And so during the 60s, we made a big deal out of female empowerment, and we got to get women in the workforce. So you have these companies that were built by men and according to the way that men think in a hierarchical sense. And those companies would compete with other companies that were formed by other men, right? So if I've got the Ford Motor Company over here and I've got Chevrolet over here, we're selling cars and we're sort of competing with each other. And as a result of that competition, we try to, it stimulates innovation. I got to invent a better car than those guys. Great. Okay, we're going to get them this year, right? And they get a new car, and it's sort of this up and up and up, kind of thing where it's like we're advancing as a result of that competition. And sometimes that means there's winners and sometimes that means there's losers, but that's how men organize male space, whether it's a sports team, whether it is even a religious organization or the military. It's all organized around that sort of hierarchical structure. But women don't do it that way. They want comfort. They want security. The primary drive for women is security. And so as that need is sort of an evolutionary need, you see them become more communitarian, and they rely more on this sort of egalitarian socialist sort of mentality. Now, you've got these businesses that were created by men. You put women now in the 60s, and you put them into those organizations, into those male structures, those male business structures. And what's the first thing that women do? They restructure the company, because they want to restructure it in such a way that is more comfortable, and it's a kinder, gentler company that is maybe not as competitive, but it's a better place to work, right? And that's the concept of hierarchies and competition. And like you were saying before, the big five personality traits. for, women tend to be more agreeable. Women tend to be less competitive than men. Well, if your social structure, which let's say in this case a business, is based on the male way of thinking in competition, and now you put women into that male space and they assimilate that space, now you have a much weaker organization, and it becomes less about selling cars than it does about pregnancy leave. Or it makes instead of an 8-hour workday, now it's a 4-hour workday, and we want to have birthday parties and bagel Fridays for somebody coming or going, whatever. And it becomes the idea of the company ceases to be about a hierarchical organization and that is competitive, and it becomes an organization that is one for you and one for you and one for you and one for you, until it becomes to the point where it fails. That business fails because they are less hierarchical than their competitors who didn't do that or are slower to do that, and they outperform that company and they get taken in by that. And that's one of the reasons why I say, like, when we look at like the workplace today, certainly in the American societies, I would presume it's in Western or in European societies as well, is when you put women into male spaces, they assimilate that space from a hierarchical structure framework, and they rewrite that to be more about this communitarian structure. And that doesn't work in the military. And that doesn't, because you'll get killed as a result of that. It doesn't work in sports teams because there has to be a captain of the team. There has to be a coach. There has to be somebody directing traffic. But if it's all about like everybody gets a turn to be captain and everybody gets a turn to be the coach, that makes for a less effective team because you're trying to make everybody happy and you're trying to like play to everybody's sort of ability to play in that organization. Whether they're weak or they're strong really makes no difference. It's not about hierarchy anymore or performance. It's about everybody gets a piece of the pie all at the same time. So when we talk about like redistributing wealth, there's no more female an idea than redistribution of wealth.
Yeah. Can I ask you something? This is what I wanted to ask you. For example, while observing myself, I was never during my life able to identify with women with women playing sports or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
If we consider sports as some sort of a metaphor of a war, mm-hmm. I cannot imagine how a man could identify with a woman as a hero of his land mm-hmm. or something like that. But mm-hmm. I do see some men cheering for females, mm-hmm. sports heroes or whatever. Mm-hmm. And do you think that these men are sincere, or are these some sort of betas? Or
that is that's a mating strategy, is what that's called. And I'm gonna use the popular vernacular of like God Soder. I think it was God Soder, maybe it was Brett Weinstein. That's called sneaky fucker game, is what it is. It's the guy who is the male feminist who thinks that the more he can identify and the more he can look like a woman and the more he can be accepted into team woman, the more likely it is that some woman is going to go, oh, you're not like these other guys, and want to have sex with them and want to have intimacy. And so it's sort of this, it's an adaptation is what it is. And it's a sexual strategy of weak men who can't perform and can't compete in the sexual marketplace, or I think that that's a good idea, and that therefore you get the male feminist who tries to sort of blend in with the crowd in the hopes that another female feminist will want to have sex with them and have babies with them. So that's number one. The other thing is like when we're talking about guys who root for a female sports team or whatever, or like maybe even just like organized female sports right now. I think you're probably going to see this on a global scale when it comes to the Olympics this year. But when we talk about like transgenderism and the fact that we place such a high importance on so low percentage of the population on human beings, whatever. First of all, I think honestly, I think transgenderism is just sort of like this next plea for attention from people, because they have been led to believe that gender is a social construct. It is not. There are only two genders, and this is a biological fact. And the the fact that people would even have a conversation about this seems ludicrous today. But what's happening now is you see in, like, say, the Olympics, or like Olympic weightlifting or Olympic swimming, and you've got a man who identifies, he just felt like being a woman today, and so therefore he goes into the women's backstroke and dominates the women's swimming events, wins a gold medal, and then promptly turns himself back into a male later on, because he felt like it the next day. What we're doing is we're sort of running headlong into reality when we realize that men and women are different physically, emotionally, mentally, on so many different ways. And now we have no other choice but to sort of recognize the fact that women cannot compete physically with men, period. End of story. So when we look at sports teams and we look at male sports, that we say, okay, basketball, for example, we've got the NBA here in the United States, and those guys are all 7 feet tall. They can slam dunk. They are, there are superheroes. I don't know how they do it, honestly, but we have the sport that's been sort of established by men in a hierarchical organization. There's the coach, and here's the team captain, and everything else. You've got this really, really popular NBA. Well, right around year 2000, 2002, 2001, I think, is when we had the WNBA, which is the Women's National Basketball Association, right? And it was a complete flop and a complete failure. Same thing happens for women's soccer here in the United States too, by the way. But so in the WNBA, they couldn't get anybody to come and watch because it was just quite honestly, it was boring because women aren't as physical and aren't as, let's say, their physical prowess is nowhere near the level of a professional basketball player here in the United States. They can't dunk. They're not tall enough, or they can't jump high enough. So what was discussed early on to get more people in and to make the game more exciting was to lower the height of the baskets so that the ladies could actually dunk. So it's not 12 feet now, now it's 10 feet, right? Well, whatever, I don't know how high it is, right? But they wanted to lower the baskets, okay? That right there is a perfect illustration of how, again, women want to organize society, change the nature of the game to fit my skills. Is it now basketball if the hoop is not 12 feet high, it's now 10 feet high? Is it the same game? I don't think so, because now it's the ladies' game. Okay, so this is how they do it because they don't have the physical capability to actually do that. Now, did they actually do that? No, they just found some taller female athletes who could actually slam dunk, and it became something else. But even just the consideration of that, what that says to me is that it's a communitarian way of thinking. It's not about the actual sport. It's not about the actual company. It's not about the actual game that they're playing. It's about the women, and it's about the skill level of the people who are playing it. So what happens is when women can't compete at a certain level, the handicap is now we're going to change the nature of the game. It's no longer all baskets are no longer at 12 feet. They're now at 10 feet. And it fundamentally changes the nature of the game. Well, the problem is when that game is the weightlifting, right? Or like the deadlifting champion of the world. Do you know who the female deadlifting champion of the world is, who holds the title, the record right now? It's a guy. His name is Zuby. He's a good friend of mine. He's actually a rapper too. He's in the UK. Black guy, really, really fun. I've done several podcasts with him before. And what he did, and he's a bodybuilder, he lifts. And so what he did was he changed his sex from male to female, went in, broke the record, and then as soon as he walked out the door, changes his sex back to male. He is now the world record holder in female deadlifting, weightlifting of the world. And nobody's touched his record yet because women simply do not have the physical strength to go and do something like that. But but that's not the point. The point isn't like holding the record. The point is that the idea that men and women are exactly the same, and it doesn't matter if you're transgender or you're not, because physicality is just this, social construct, or it's subjective, is bullshit. And so when these guys go and do something like that, what you're doing is you're seeing this conflict between like the want to make the ladies feel better and emotionalism and prioritizing emotion above reason. And the reason is, or the rationality of this is men are stronger than women. It's not hard to figure that kind of stuff out. But we're only now approaching this or having the conversation because Zuby can go on and win the world's record at deadlifting. And now they're forced to confront reality. So now we're saying, oh, well, maybe it's not cool that, you know, biological male transgenders can actually compete in the female division of sports. Well, if you say that that's going to be the new rule, then what you're saying is it's not about a social construct. It's about physical, evolved reality. And now we have another conversation about the fact how screwed up you are in the head to believe that in the first place.
Yep. If you take into consideration this three spheres of working or whatever, for example, you can work for government, you can work in a corporate world and for a multinational corporation, and you can work for a small to middle-sized mama papa kind of company, free market kind of company. Would you say that about women entering the so-called free markets or the market, would you say that there's an illusion to it, a fiction to it, in the sense that not many women work in the free markets? They work in corporate worlds and they work for government, the majority of women. Would you say that this is true? Or and how is it possible, for example, for multinational corporations like Nike, for example, they I know the libertarian critique of corporations, that they are not free market, they are crony capitalism and so forth and so forth. But would you say that how can they it's obvious that it's not competition anymore if you can pander to women, isn't it?
Well, again, the reason why we're even having this conversation is because we have subscribed to an idea or an ideology that men and women are just the same, and women, and in some cases, really now I see the narrative shifting. Like, well, we'll be in better shape if we put women in charge, or we have the first female president, or we have women who are in control of the purse strings as the director of the EMF or the IMF or the World Bank or whatever else, the Fed, right? And that we'll be in better shape because we have a woman there, or we want to in place quotas on companies, and you can't do business in California here in the United States if you don't have at least 50% women on your board of directors, right? And if you don't, then there's going to be a fine. And what that does is it limits the capacity for that company to excel, because it's not based on rational, reasonable performances. It's based on quotas. And so it's not about your talent or your competency, as we were talking before. It is about again, making women like one for you and one for you and one for you. It's instead of redistributing the wealth, it's redistributing the jobs. And so when we look at that on a corporate level, we can talk about, that's one thing. We can look at it on a political level. Well, we won't reach true equality until we have half of the White House has to be women, and right now it's actually more women than men. But if you go and you look at the idea that to reach true gender parity, we have to have some sort of laws that make that so. Well, what happens is you end up handicapping and really hobbling your country and your business and your society if it's not based on merit. And that's really what a hierarchical organization should idealistically be based upon, is the best of the best. Who does the best job? Who does the most competent? Who's the best leader? Who's the best engineer? Who is the best, whatever there happens to be their talents. And regardless of sex, regardless of gender, or, regardless of ethnicity or whatever, if you're better at something, or you happen to be better at something than someone else, it stands to reason that you will build a society in a better way if you have the guys who are the best of the best and the brightest. So, but we don't do that. And we don't do that. I'm not just talking about the United States. We don't do that worldwide. And so we have this idea that of what I've really criticized for a very long time is we need to kill off this idea of the blank slate. And the blank slate is that everybody's equal. Everyone's born equal, and we're all the same, and we all have the same, like men and women, there's no differences. But the fact is like more and more in the 21st century, we realize men and women are vastly different in our thinking, in our biologies, certainly in our physiologies. We see that in sports. And so when you do that, and you have, I think one of the reasons why I get so much criticism right now is because I draw attention to that. I connect dots that are very uncomfortable for most guys, for most people to look at. I can say that in terms of dating, but I can also talk about it in terms of society and politics and business and whatever else. But I think that when you put women into those positions of power, as a result of an ideology that says we need more women in there, what you do is you hobble that society. You end up handicapping that society, and the societies that don't do that are going to be the ones that are going to outperform your country or your society. As a result, very similar to what I said about businesses. So you have this hierarchy, this male space hierarchical business. You put women into it, and you weaken that company as a result of just different organizational concepts or approaches. Take that and now extrapolate that and build that up into a country. Which countries are going to succeed and which countries are going to, which ones are going to dominate and which ones are going to sort of knuckle under the other ones. It's going to be the ones who completely ignore quotas and ignore sex and ignore ethnicities, and they're going to promote the best and the brightest. We're going to use the best of our talent pool to make our country, our business, the strongest that it can be, and we're going to completely ignore these quotas and everything else. Those countries are going to be the one that dominates, the ones that still have that idea that everything should be gender neutral and have gender parity and everything else, because they end up weakening that society. So I think that as far as like bringing what is the concept of putting women into those positions, I think it's really just this idea that we have to, it's retribution and restitution, right? We have to have more women in there for a while now, so everything will be even, right? We have to have more women because men have always been the ones who've dominated the political sphere, and now we've got to put women in there. Well, that's all fine and great, but what happens when you finally reach that parity and the other country that's your competitor who wants to see you dead or wants to go to war with you or wants to crush you economically, while you're trying to achieve gender parity, they're dominating the economic space and the global, geopolitically, they're dominating us because they don't have those same social ideals that we do.
If there would be for a woman that would be able to disconnect the debate with her emotions, what can a woman make of your book, your philosophy of a rational male? Mm-hmm. What would be the most intelligent approach of a woman toward this topic over towards the
Okay, I think the idea of women approaching my book from a rational perspective is sort of a failed idea. Let's just start with that. And that's not an insult to women. I'm not saying, you're stupid to understand. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the desire to want, there are very few. I have quite a few female fans. Don't get me wrong, but they had to come to it through hating it. Right? They had to go, what is this guy? What's all this crap that he's writing? And so then they read it. So and then they go, oh, wait, my joke is this. And I believe I wrote this. I think it was in the introduction of my second book. I had a reader tell me that he was reading The Rational Male, and he was sitting on his couch or on his nightstand or something like that. And his wife or his girlfriend snatches the book. He says, give me that. What is this rational male stuff? I'm not rational, man. There's no such thing as a rational man. You're losing her mind, right? Give me that. I'll be the judge of this. And she goes and she reads it for like 4 days, because when you read my book, it's not like a book it's hard to put down. I'm not to pat myself on the back, but it's something that a lot of guys, when they start reading it, they keep going chapter by chapter by chapter. Women too. And so she read this. She comes back to the guy 3 or 4 days later, and she takes the book, she throws it on, and he's on the couch. She says, everything in that book is true, and you shouldn't know any of it. And I think that's the mentality, right? It's like there's this, you have to hate me before you can love me, ladies. So you have to go through this process of sort of like busting yourself down and going, you know what, maybe he has a point about that. And I think that it's not that women can't understand it. It's that when they first see it, they have to get past that emotional impulse for anger. And because it's angry, if I say I'm a rational male and I'm going to teach you about female nature, and I'm a guy teaching men about female nature, women get very defensive about that because because it's like giving away the keys to the castle. They don't want me to give guys the cheat code to, how to interact with women. They want to be as unknowable and as mysterious as possible, because that's what really helps them in, at least they believe so, it helps them in figuring out whether a guy is for real or he's not for real. If there's a book that says, here's how you can trick women into thinking that you're for real, that's what they believe, then they're going to have an emotional response to that. So now when I talk about emotion and rationality, I have to insert this in here. The whole thing is in my fourth book. I talk about this. It's instinct, emotion, and reason. And that's really kind of related. Maybe Tadej, this is, it's called the triune mind theory. And what that means is that human beings process information, our surroundings, what we can see, smell, what we can perceive with our senses, in three different ways. One is the instinctual. So if I were to throw a rock at you right now, you would instinctively, flinch out of the way, right? Or those kind of fight or flight is an instinct. Sexuality is an instinct. Danger, adrenaline rush is you see a dangerous animal, you're gonna be like, you have an instinctual response to that. Revulsion is being, grossed out by something. That's an instinctual response to certain things. So it's usually a survival thing, or it's usually something that it's sort of in our peripheral awareness, because it's so important to us that we always have to have it kind of in our hard wiring and our mental firmware. So that's the instinctual side, and that usually resides in the brain stem. It's like the very base. It's like we call it the lizard brain or the hind brain, and those are your gut instincts that have served human beings since we were crawling out of the ocean as alligators, right? I mean, that's the whole it's our instinctual nature, right? And you can see where that is in the brain. Again, I'm not a neuroscientist, but this is the theory, okay? The other theory and then you get from instinct, you get to emotion. And emotion is, how do we feel about something? Do we get sad? Do we get angry? What are the base emotions? And how do I process the information that's sort of coming into me from the outside world in an emotional sense? Now, emotions are not magic. Love is not magic. I know that we write lots of songs about it, but from love, hate, anger, fear, sadness, happiness, all those emotions are chemical reactions. All of those are triggered by certain events, and in our bodies we secrete hormones or whatever. I can make you angry by triggering parts of your brain. I can make you a completely different person if I get you drunk, right? Or if I give you steroids, right? You go into roid rage. You could be more angry and aggressive as a result of that. I can make you feel certain things by changing your biochemistry. So you have to remember that emotion is not some astrological cosmic energy that we're going to be all emotional and loving. Human beings need emotion to interpret and understand their world. So if I'm fearful, usually that fear is life preserving. There might be a dangerous, Black Panther in the jungle there. I'm afraid. I'm going to get the hell out of here. So you have that instinctual sense. Or, for instance, if you're disgusted by something, that's the human revulsion response. But disgust is the emotion, right? So if you see a dead body, you want to get away from it. Or you see, a big pile of cow shit, you go, get away. That sense, that's part of emotion and instinct, because you want to get away from filthy things that might have pathogens in them. You don't want to catch a disease from a dead rotting corpse or a pile of dung. You want to get away from that. So that's the emotion and the instinct. And then finally, and that, by the way, is in the amygdala. I can't remember what the other part. It's the midsection of the brain. And then there is.
I saw your graph. I saw your graph on the.
Graph. Yeah, I've got it. It's actually in my other StreamYard thing.
Yeah, I'll put it in the video later.
Sure. And then finally, there's the gray matter. That's what constitutes most of your brain, and that's where rationalization and reason come into play. It's learning, it's understanding things, it's figuring things out. And the rational mind, the rational brain, can supersede. It can overwrite emotion, and it can override instinct. And I'll show you how that happens. For instance, like I don't know if you're taking any martial arts, but it's instinctual for men or for human beings to want to avoid conflict. We don't want to put our face in front of a fist if we can avoid it, right? If we can learn how to fight, if we can take martial arts, if we can be confident in defending ourselves physically because we know karate or we know judo or whatever else, because we know that, now what we've done is we've overwritten that impulse to be fearful in certain situations. So now I don't have to be scared and instinctually run away from the saber-toothed tiger. I've got a spear. I learned how to make a spear, and now I can kill that damn thing the next time it comes out of the jungle because I'm smart and I have a rational brain, and I'm going to tamp down my fear because I know I'm confident in my skills. I've practiced enough, and I'm going to kill the damn thing before it kills me. That's the overriding your instinct and your emotion with reason. There's lots of other examples for this, but the long and the short of it is that reason and rationality, whatever you want to call it, the gray matter part of the brain, takes longer to develop. It takes a longer time to learn how to sort of suppress the emotions, or to put that stuff down, or to learn how to behave in certain situations. It's slower than emotion. When men and women have an emotional response, it's instantaneous. So they're almost instantaneous, or they build up to it, but it's much faster than having to go through the process of learning something that your gray matter and your rationality and your reason it requires, so that you can learn those skills and those behaviors as a result. It also, an instinct of all of those, instinct, emotion, and reason, instinct is the fastest. So if I go and I throw something at you, you flinch out of the way. That's pretty fast. Okay. Later on, you'll figure out, why did Rollo throw that rock at me? I feel bad, right? Then, so there's the emotional side, and then there's the rational and reasonable side. So instinct, emotion, and reason. That's, in a nutshell, that's the triune mind theory. Now, when it comes to men and when it comes to women, men prioritize instinct, emotion, and reason in a different way. So you have women who prioritize it thusly. Instinct, everybody, like men and women, instinct always comes first because it's a survival mechanism. Instinct is first in the line of processing for both. For women, it's instinct, emotion, and then reason. For men, it is instinct, reason, and then emotion. And we can see this reflected in the way that men and women communicate with one another. So like when I'm connecting and talking to you right now, I'm relating information to you. So it's all like we're prioritizing the information of our conversation. So we prioritize the content and the info of that conversation. For women tend to prioritize the context. How did that make them feel? Women really enjoy communication because they're better at it. Their minds are literally, I can show you the studies, are literally wired for communication as a result of being the berry pickers, forming social networks for survival, and then nurturing children. As I said, communitarianism is all rooted in women prioritizing emotion before reason. Now, for men, it's the other way around. If I want to go out and hunt the saber-toothed tiger or run down a caribou, I got to have a team of guys. We got to figure this out. We got to learn how to build spears or bow and arrows or whatever it is, so that we can take down game and bring it back to the tribe so we can all eat. And the babies survive, and whoever gets the kill, you're the alpha male of the group because you killed the antelope and you bring it back, and all the ladies want to bang you, right? And so you get to reproduce because you're either quicker, smarter, faster, stronger, or freaking luckier than any other guy in the tribe, and you got the kill, right? Again, hierarchy versus a communitarian way of thinking, but all of that is as a result of how men and women process those responses, like instinct, emotion, and reason. So when you say, well, will a woman rationally, like, what would she say about your book, Rollo, from a rational sense? And that's why I say that doesn't make any sense, because women prioritize emotion before reason. So therefore she has to go through, give me that book. This is all bullshit. This makes me feel bad. This makes me feel angry. This makes me feel like you're trying to get one past me, kind of thing. And then reason kicks in. Oh, he's not really that bad. Look at what he's saying. Everything in this book is true, and you shouldn't know any of it. Like, that's the process. You went through emotion and then through reason for women. For men, it's the other way around. When we're communicating with each other and we were processing the information, later on, after I'm done with this communicate with our call here, I'm going to go, how did Alesh make me feel? If I ever get to that, right? If I ever get to that point, because right now I'm just relating information, and that's what makes me feel good, is being able to relate info so that you can use it to benefit your life and to cooperate. And we're not taking down caribou, but I'm teaching you something along the way as a result of me relating information to you. Now, when we're done with this interview here, you might go, man, that guy's a real asshole, or that guy he's a really swell guy. I would really like, so that's now you're processing the emotion after you've interpreted what I've had to say through your rationality and reason. So there's different ways that women have a natural proclivity to process emotion before reason. Men have a reason before emotion. Now, lastly, because I know what's going to happen. People are going to say, well, I know lots of emotional guys, Rollo. They're all pussies, or they're manginas, or they're like sneaky fuckers, right? They're guys who just, they start with emotion and they just wear their emotions on their sleeve, and they're vulnerable and they cry on demand. Those guys are very emotional. Yeah, because they've learned to prioritize emotion before reason. When you raise a child, male or female, to say, hey, you know what, Johnny, it's better to process emotion, better for you to get in touch with your emotional side. Johnny, you're 5 years old. It's better for you to express yourself emotionally. It's better for you to get in touch with your female side, right? It's better for you to live that way. Well, by the time Johnny's 25 years old, he might be crying on demand. He might be the most emotional guy you know. That doesn't mean that it's his natural, innate way of processing. It's just he's been conditioned by his teachers, which are primarily female, to prioritize much in the same way as the guy who learns martial arts. If you learn except in this case, it's like your martial arts is learning to think like a woman. So instead of karate, it's express yourself emotionally, Johnny. That's the right way to do things. You do that enough and you learn that, and it overrides your natural, innate way of thinking about prioritizing emotion, instinct, emotion, and reason.
Yeah. So when the guys don't express emotion, right, they say you need to go to therapy and so on. And then on the therapies, right, it's all females running the therapies, and then
something
it's
wrong with their software. You got a virus.
Yeah, and then the talk in the therapies is like, I'm going against biology, right? Because you shouldn't worry about that. You shouldn't do that and this. But it's like, well, we are wired so that we worry about things, that we care about things. You are not a nihilist. So, I mean, fundamentally in biology, you care about things. You are in social world, and you care about how people think about you. So it's like impossible to say you just don't care about what others think. And that's the new modern trend, that you say, oh, don't care what others think about you. So that's one thing. So it is femalism, as you also say, right?
Emotionalism. It's prioritizing. Now, as I was saying before, instinct, emotion, and reason. If you build a society based on emotion, what does that look like? It looks an awful lot like what a female-run society looks like. We want to make sure that don't judge people. Don't judge me for my actions. I don't want to feel bad. It's feels before reals, and you'll see that in our popular culture and our popular narratives, our songwriting right now. It's all about like prioritizing emotion above read. Like follow your heart and it'll never fail you. It'll guide you to the promised land. And it's like bullshit. You need to think about things. You need to be educated and make good educated educated decisions based on your best available knowledge. It's not about like, oh, well, I follow my heart and cry a little bit along the way and things will work out in the end. No, it doesn't. And that's why we're in such a bad, state of affairs where we're at right now. I'm glad you brought this up, because it's funny. When I was on a show, I don't know if you caught it. It's called You Are Here, and it's on The Blaze, and it's Elijah Schaefer and Sydney Watson. And I was on actually two of their shows, and then I was on his private show, which was slightly offensive, which is what it's called. And so I'm on there with this feminist, this lesbian feminist who's supposed to be conservative, kind of feminist, right? And she's there, and I knew exactly what I was getting into when I was sitting in that seat. I was sitting in the seat next to her, and she's, astrology this, and the law of attraction, and it feels, but essentially just saying feels before reals, and trying to go, can I finish, please? I'm going to tell you about. So I said, fine, go do what you're going to do, and then I laid into her, and I said, and this is part of my speech, or part of my talk was, there's this idea that men should process a proper, healthy man should essentially be an emotional woman, because that's the best way he could be. He could, the problem with you is you're emotionally stunted. No, I'm a man, and I don't process. My brain doesn't have the same hardware as your brain, and I don't process emotion the same way that a woman does. I go by instinct, reason, and then emotion. I'm not saying I'm unemotional. I'm just saying it comes after, in the process, it comes after rationality. And so, and it should, because that's the way men's brains are wired. So I made this example. I said, women will think that I, or, other men are just completely stunted, emotionally repressed human beings because we didn't cry at the end of Titanic. Right? Or a sad movie or something like that. Oh, there must be something wrong with you. How could you not be affected by this emotionally? It's like, no, that's just not the way my brain works. Now, it's not that I can't, be brought to tears by a movie. It's just that it happens differently for me because my brain doesn't have the same machinery that your brain has. So when we develop and codify a society, and we say, this is the proper way to think, and that proper way is emotion before, feels before reals, emotion before reason, and we build a society about that, there are going to be consequences for that, and we're already suffering those consequences right now. It's emotionalism versus empiricism, emotion versus reason, and you see this play out in every popular debate, when it comes to transgender, when it comes to racial issues, when it comes to political issues, when it comes to you name it, name the societal, the human issue that's going on in the world today, and I will point out the debate between emotionalism versus rationalism every single time.
I just want to insert here, when you talk about instincts, where do the motivational systems then go? Isn't that maybe overlapping with instincts? Because usually, sorry,
what you saying?
Motivational systems. So we have motivational systems and emotional systems, right? So because we can perceive the world, because the world is full of infinitive facts around us, right? Objective facts, and have structures of structures, so we can perceive the world, right? But then I guess would instincts go along with motivational systems, because usually a motivation drives you to a specific aim, right? And then emotion, and emotion could then regulate you towards that goal.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely,
maybe an instinct is overlapping together with emotion, but then again, even emotion and motivation probably have big overlaps. So I think from objective side, it's very hard to make distinctions between such phenomena, because I think it's beyond our comprehension. But from the conceptual perspectives, of course, the theory that you talk about is sensible. Yes.
Okay, so I agree with that. As far as motivational systems, as far as what the stimuli that's prompting an instinctual response or instinctual interpretation of it, right? So let's say I think what is it we have this idea. I mean, it's fantasy, of course, but it's a porcupine can shoot its quills. Right? Well, a porcupine can't actually shoot its quills, right? But the idea that it can prevents you from getting too close to actually getting where that getting close to the animal, because if you get a quill in you, it's pretty painful, right? So the idea that I use that example this is actually Brett Weinstein's example, but I use that as an example of trying to explain metaphorical truth versus objective truth. Okay.
Oh yeah.
That's a little out of the scope for this discussion here, but as far as motivational systems are concerned, my motive of not getting close to the porcupine is, well, I don't want to get a stinger in my ass, so I don't want to have to deal with that. And so what's the stimuli? Well, there's a dangerous animal right there. What's my response? Instinctually, I'm like, or maybe there's a fear response that goes along with that. So as far as the stimulus is concerned, or the outside information, whatever the environment or the circumstance or the stimulus or whatever, I use stimuli because I'm a behavioral psychologist, but that is always going to prompt an instinctual response or an emotional response or a rational response to, like, what do I do in this situation? Now, I will add one thing to this because I've been reading about this quite a bit recently, and it would add courtesy of Steve Stewart Williams. The idea is that emotions are meant to be prompts to behavior for human beings. So okay. I have recently been like, it's easier if you think about it in terms of happiness, right? When we talk about like, I'm going to make a woman happy, or contentment, right? We're happy and we're content or whatever. And we always want to be happy. That's why we have antidepressants, right? We're always looking for some sort of gratification. We talk about this all the time in the manosphere about was it serotonin versus dopamine and all that influence. And well, the problem is I think we end up thinking about emotions in the wrong way. And this is, like I said, what I've been reading about recently is that when we look at happiness, for example, you can apply it to sadness and other emotions too. But for happiness is not something like, well, if I get this, then I'll be happy. If I get to this state, I can sustain the state of happiness is a fantasy. It's the process of getting from one place to the other and being happy in that process that motivates you to action. So if you're like, man, my life sucks. I gotta become something, right? Well, that becoming something in there, if you find something that's enjoyable, something that makes you happy as a result of that, then that happiness, the more happy you are in doing it, is what is going to prompt you into getting to the next level, into satisfying like whatever your discontent is. And like, I hate being where I'm at. I'm discontent. I want to get to another stage. Well, happiness or sadness or anger or whatever the emotion is, that is the most useful. And it doesn't matter what the emotion is, because nature doesn't really care about whether you're happy or you're sad. It cares about whether or not you're going to propagate your genes and you're going to survive. You're going to find food. Like, why do we get angry when we get hungry, for example? Right? You ever been hangry where you're like, I get all, I want to punch somebody because you haven't eaten all day. But what's the function of that, right? Why do I get pissed off and frustrated and when I want to eat? Well, because that used to be something that would motivate us to go out and kill food and eat the food, right? I mean, that was the motivation. Well, that's the emotion of frustration or anger or whatever that prompts you to something that gets you from one state to another state. So when we talk about like happiness or depression or anger or whatever, I name the base emotion, and that emotion is meant to get us from one state of being to another state of being. And I don't mean this in like, woo, state of being. I mean it in terms of like, I have a goal and I want to climb the mountain. Well, I'm at the base of the mountain and it looks like a pretty tall climb to get to the peak of the mountain. Well, if I find personal reward and intrinsic enjoyment out of mountain climbing, that makes getting to the top of that a whole lot easier than being pissed off and depressed about it the whole time, right? So if you can find some sort of reward in that doing, like the happiness for human beings is in the doing. It's not in the having, it's in the doing of it. Because emotion as a function is usually something that motivates us to get from one state to another. So if I'm in love with my wife, that love serves a purpose because it benefits my family, it benefits reproduction, it benefits our life being together and coexisting together. It might even help me find food, or a better job because I love my wife. I want to, have the best life for both of us because I love her. That means I got to go figure something out to make more money. It's prompting you to a different state. And I think we make a big mistake because, and again, I'm going to lay this right at the feet of like feminine thinking, is that we can sustain that emotion indefinitely. You want to know why antidepressants are prescribed to certainly women in the United States I can show you, I have the graph somewhere around here. It is like astronomically high. I think it's like 75% of women between the ages of like 35 and 45 years old in the United States are prescribed some form of SSRI, which is an antidepressant drug. Why? Well, they're in states of, is it overprescription? Is it just like, pill pushers? No, it's a concept that happiness should be an enduring, maintainable, sustainable state. And it's not. It's not a goal. It's not pussy at the end of the rainbow. It is you going from one state to another. And nature doesn't care if you're pissed off. Nature doesn't care if you're sad or you're happy or whatever. Whatever gets you off your ass from one point A to point B, and that emotion you feel in between, that if it got you to where you need to be to survive, then that's all that matters.
Yeah, Alesh and myself would probably say that the path from the point A to point B would be meaning and not happiness, and that the happiness is a side effect on that goal that we reach.
It's a motivational influence. It's an incentive. How about that? It's an incentive to get you from one point to another.
Maybe Alesh can have a word here.
Mm-hmm. Come on, man. You asked me.
Why are you asking all these tough questions, man?
My brain hurts.
My brain hurts. I'm not a Saturday philosopher, so.
I'll tell you this today is I think we place too much importance on meaning and not enough importance on purpose, and particularly for men these days. I think that if men could find purpose and find a direction in their life, then, I'm not saying that's like finding meaning or some sort of, esoteric idea of whatever meaning means to you. I think that would be, if you wanted to get to that state, if you wanted to have a more, fulfilling life, I don't even know what to call it really. It happens as a result of doing. And happiness comes from doing, and doing means you have to have a purpose to do in the first place. So you want to know why guys are unhappy today in the Lost Boys generation, and everybody's depressed, and guys, are dropping out of society, and they're jerking off to porn, and they're smoking weed and doing edibles, and living in mom's basement because they're just fat and happy and they got no motivation or no incentive to do anything else, is because they don't have any purpose for them to be happy. Like if I don't have a goal, if I don't have something that I'm working forward towards, how can I be happy in a process if there's no process in the beginning? So when I talk about I'll leave you guys with this because I don't have much more time. But when I talk about, and I mentioned this in my fourth book, and this is, I don't mean to get too philosophical here, but I've heard Dr. Jordan Peterson talk about how, life is just a series of mitigating and dealing with suffering. And I'm like, that's bullshit. I think that, and I understand where he comes by that idea, but honestly, I think that the human condition is discontent. It is humanity is defined by our discontent, and we're supposed to be discontent. It's not a bad thing to be discontent. It's the bad or the good happens in how you deal with that discontent. So you have two ways to deal with discontent. You can deal with it constructively and creatively, or you can deal with it destructively. So you can burn your house down and be pissed off and fight other guys, and you can destroy the world to in some way you reach a point where you think you're going to be content, or you can build something and you could go, you know what, I'm going to get a degree. I'm going to climb that mountain. I've got a new goal. I've got a purpose. And in that purpose, I find happiness as a result of my doing that thing. Now, people will say, well, you can be content in God, or you can be content in this. And I was like, okay, fine. But beyond the metaphysical, your state of being is always going to be some state of discontent. You won't be, I'm going to go to bed right here in a little while here. I'm going to go to sleep. And about 2 a.m, I'm going to have to get up and take a piss. And I'm going to be like, that's discontent. I got to get up and go to the bathroom and take a leak. And then I come back and go, well, guess what I've done? I've gotten up, I've taken care of that discontent, flushed the toilet, and I came back to bed happy, fat and happy, right? So that's the idea of content can be sort of like on the micro level, or it can be on the macro level. So when you have guys who are like school shooters, or you have people who are trying to deal with their discontent in an emotional way, in a destructive way, that's how you get, human sadness and atrocities and everything else. Whereas if you're building something and you're creating something and moving from one state to another, you'll be content when you get to it, right? Maybe even destructively, you'll be content after you kill everybody around you. And then, half an hour later, you go, okay, what's next? You go, hey, now I'm hungry again. You'll be like, hey, now I've got my doctorate in philosophy that took me 10 years to get. Well, I thought I was going to be content, but what's next? And it's not a bad thing. You're supposed to be discontent. That's what motivates you on to bigger and better things, and creating and building a what ends up being your life's work, I guess. But the idea that we can reach some state of contentment and nirvana, and we can be happy in a maintainable, sustainable state of contentment is just bullshit. Because we're supposed to be discontent. That's why we're so good that's why we're the apex species on planet Earth. There's nothing wrong with being discontent. It's how you deal with it.
Then we need probably we need a discussion between you and Peterson about such.
One of these days, he'd hate my guts now that I came at Michaela. Michaela invited me on that damn show. Let me be clear, okay? It wasn't me. She invited me.
I was not impressed with Michaela at all.
She's 30 years old, going on 12.
No, but it's like she doesn't even listen to her father. So I was shocked, actually. So
the point of me being on that show was to clear her name for her new boyfriend, who is 23 years old and is like just head over heels in love with her. She's 30, he's 23. And I'm like, it's all explained to me now. I get it now. Thanks for using me, Michaela.
Yeah, that's what we discussed a couple of weeks ago when I saw on Instagram. Wait a minute, didn't she have some sort of Russian in her life or something like that?
Okay, so what was she? 23 years old. She'd already gotten with this guy Andre, who is Russian, but I think he's dual national, and they started dating, and she fell in love with him, and then they had an accidental baby. She even says that, she was a mistake. She literally said she was a mistake, but she wanted to have the kid, and she didn't want to have it out of wedlock. And I think primarily it was more because she wanted to protect her father's reputation, and then after a while it just became too inconvenient for her for whatever reason. And I try to use her as an example amongst other women on this show that I called Kill to Party. And on Kill to Party, there's what I have recognized as sort of this female dynamic is that women who have kids who haven't been able to sort of consolidate on the alpha male or to find the guy of their dreams or the one or whatever it is, or they want to be out in the sexual marketplace, but they're kind of hindered by having that kid in tow. And so therefore that kid, and I'm not saying she's actually going to kill the child. I'm just saying that kid, it becomes liability to her ability to be out in the sexual marketplace because men don't want to get with single mothers. And she knows that. And every girl who is in her 20s with a kid in tow understands exactly what I'm saying. And it's, there's my friend Kevin Savo has a rap video called Thought Mommies in the Club. And that's essentially what, motivated that video. Well, Michaela's a pretty good example of that, because now she wants to go on tour with her dad, and she wants to go, and that's what she's doing right now. She is Jordan Peterson's manager, his PR guy, his press guy, his web guy, everything. She runs the show for Jordan Peterson. So when she's playing, she's on stage with dad to a 3,000 seat arena that's sold out somewhere. She's riding his coattails. But while she's doing so, Andre's at home watching the kid. And she is not in any way 30 years old with a kid in tow. She is. If you want to say, well, is she a mother? Because she looks like a chick that you would find in any club and she's all wearing sexy little skirts and average, looking real hot and cutesy and everything. And let me tell you something, man. That kid, I think, is like 4 years old now. And the idea that my wife would be like, oh, yeah, I'll see you later. I'm going to have a girls' night out, and you're going to watch the kid at 4 years old. That wouldn't even enter into a concept for us. It wouldn't enter a concept for her because she just loves the kid so much and has that maternal instinct that that wouldn't even be. I'm not going on girls' night out. It wouldn't even be a conversation. But when you're in the situation where you're still looking for the perfect guy, or you're looking for somebody and you're still advertising yourself on the sexual marketplace, then yeah, that kid becomes baggage. It becomes an inconvenience. And I don't know that anybody really looks at her and says, oh yeah, she's a mother. I mean, look at her, like just any of her Instagram shots and you go, oh yeah, she looks like she's a mom. No, she's not a mom. I
don't want to comment.
Yeah. I know. It makes me sad because it's like, even as a guy, even as a father, I'd be like, I'm not going out with you. I want to be with my kid. I've got a kid here. It's not like even parental, like I want to be a good father. That's not where it comes. I love my kid. I really want to spend time with him. I genuinely want to spend time with my kid. So the idea of, putting my kid off so that I can go on Fresh and Fit, or I can go on, go to the clubs or something like that is just
one last question.
Okay. Hit it.
One last question. The role of the father. Jordan B. Peterson is the famous clinical psychologist in the world, and you thought that he would raise his girl in a proper way, sort of say.
Do you think he did?
I don't know, and I can tell you about my experience. I had 3 girlfriends in my life. I had my first girlfriend. We were together for 15 years, and then I had 2 3-year relationships. And to be honest, I noticed that the relationship they had with their fathers is somehow connected to the relationship they had, the attitude they had toward
daddy issues. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is basically the one last question. What is the role of the father?
Well, I can tell you what my role as a father. I can tell you what Jordan B. Peterson thinks about what's role. I think that, like, I've had this question gets thrown at me all the time. I've had guys ask me, like, Rollo, do you think it's possible for, what do you think about the idea of men electively becoming single fathers? Because it's very easy for a woman to become a single mother today. Go down to a sperm donor or whatever. You can do it online now. It's easy. You can get it for as cheap as like $300. Whoever wants to give it to you, right? And there's like resource, seriously, on Facebook even, like there's resources to sort of track down a father, suitable father for your. It doesn't have to be like from some reputable fertility clinic. You just go on Twitter and say, "Hey, jerk off into a cup for me." Sure, how much? $300? No problem. I'll meet you on the B train. Right? That's the process, more or less. So it's very easy for a woman to electively become a single mother. For men, it's very hard, very difficult to become a single father by choice, because you have to get a surrogate mother. Or these guys were telling me, they're like, do you think that there's going to be an artificial womb and we'll be able to have kids and won't have to have women, be in control of us? I'm like, dude, I said, I will tell you exactly what I tell every single mother. Don't do it. I don't understand why anybody would electively want to be a single parent. And I think it sort of goes against our basic sort of evolved instincts, first of all. But even if I couldn't make that case, I tell guys the same thing, is that it is better. You will do better with that child with 2 parents in the household. A man and a woman, a mother and a father, preferably married, preferably in some sort of committed long-term relationship. That has proven to be the best way to raise children since we were running around naked on the sub-Saharan African plains as hunter-gatherer tribes 100,000 years ago. That was the best way to do it. Don't if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But today, women will electively, or maybe even covertly, become single mothers as a result. But the problem with that is that when children, the reason why that's so successful, I should say, is because men and women, like mothers and fathers, become the gender role, or the conventional gender role, the conventional gender model, I should say, for men. And for the masculine is my dad, and for the feminine is my mom. Now, what if mom's a ball-busting boss girl, right, or an alpha female? What if you have, like most men in the United States, what if you're raised by a single mother? What if that mother believes that she's just as good a father as she is a mother? Well, that's going to affect that child's mentality, when that later on, that adult's mentality or his approach towards what is masculine and what is feminine. So if your whole life you've been taught that masculine men, like your bastard father was, who was never around, or maybe he wasn't as actively involved, or whatever it is, or mom kicked him out of the house because she demonized him, or whatever the reason. Remember, women in the US anyways, I don't know what the rates are in Europe, but women initiate 70% of divorces, at least 70%. I've seen stats that say it's higher, but I'm going to go with the low one. 70% of divorces are initiated by women. Okay, well, what's dad's role in that divorce? We always presume he's an abusive son of a bitch, and that he needs to get put out of the house. Well, that's not, statistically speaking, that's actually not as significant as the fact that men tend to lose divorces. Women are the ones who tend to initiate the divorces. Women are incentivized financially and socially to initiate those divorces. And so if you're going to remove men from the family, there's going to be consequences for that, because you're removing the masculine model for those children, and you're replacing it with either mommy's boyfriend or mommy herself, who thinks she's just as good as any guy. And so, yeah, you screw up. You want to know why women have daddy issues and they become strippers and porn stars and everything else, is because there's no man there. And even if there is, even if the man is part of the family, the biological father's there. And if he's a weak male, if he's a beta male, if he's not, he's sort of a passive participant in the whole thing, again, that becomes that girl's model for masculinity. So men are weak. Maybe she's more attracted to very dominant, almost abusive guys as a result of that, because she never really got the authority from her father that she really needs. She needed the discipline. She didn't get that from daddy. She's going to look for it in Christian Grey or Jason Momoa or whoever she has some sort of fantasy about, who is an authoritative masculine figure, a dominant masculine alpha male, is going to be something that, and generally she's going to look for guys who are dark triad, like the Tony Starks, right? They're going to look for the Batman instead of the Superman as a result of that. And so what happens is that if that's the model of masculinity for women, and you get enough women who can sort of commiserate and it resonates with enough women, then you get a society full of women who have daddy issues as a result. So what I would say is that when guys are, I would almost argue this. It's like if the father is an absentee father, that's bad. But what's worse is if daddy is actually in the house and mommy runs the house. I would say that's worse than the father who's not there, but yet he's still involved in the family. So
but that's one problem that we don't talk about, right? It's the debt deprivation, and there's so much of effects on boys and girls. Actually, it's so many data and stats about it.
Oh yeah,
about IQ, about development,
drug use, depression, suicide, all of that. Yeah, as a result
of high school, and then also, like you said, even if a father is involved somehow passively in a family, and if he is a drunk or something, that confuses a mate choice for a girl in adulthood, right? So, and we don't talk about these things. Even even if it's a male problem, it's a problem also for women, but we don't talk about it. So it's scary for me, because I don't know what's in front of us in future in the next 50 years, because I don't know what's going to happen with marriage and long-term relationships, and most importantly, with the destroying of marriage, we are actually destroying the interests of children. So
yeah, exactly. It's family creation and sustaining families. That's why, like, I don't know if it's in Slovenia, but I think, was it in Hungary, where they are paying couples to have children, like get married, have kids, and you'll get a tax break, or you'll get to own a better car, right? Or you get to live in this apartment over here because you have children, and we want to foster heterosexual couples to actually get together, knock it out, and have some babies. And if you have two, you get even a better bonus because of that, because they're trying to in some way counteract the fertility rates in those countries, because it has become so low that it's beneath replacement levels, and it threatens really the national sovereignty and the integrity of that country, because there's no babies, there's no baby boom, there's no kids, there's nobody to replace the Hungarians, right?
And there's another problem with polygamy, right? Because we can have babies, but with the polygamy on the trend, it's hurting the children again. And with all the technology, of course, which is enhancing polygamy. And I think that we firstly need to regulate a society to be monogamous, right? That's my belief. I think for healthy society and
I've said this. I'm very much anti polyamory. I think it's a cutesy way of saying of really, honestly, I think polyamory in a gynocentric social order is what works best for women, but it will destabilize societies like you've never seen because of the jealousy. Again, remember we talk about instincts and emotion and reason. Jealousy is one of those emotions and those instincts that can lead to violence, lead to infanticide, lead to so many different things. But
there's two things. It's the female fecundity, right, and then male aggression. So
I've heard this is that, like, people say, well, human beings are naturally promiscuous, and they are, but we are monogamous by choice because we have to be, and we want to parentally invest in men do anyways, want to parentally invest in children that are actually genetically our kids. That's a biological evolutionary fact. And the reason they say that is because we can see the stats amongst, like, when mommy gets a boyfriend after she kicks the biological father out of the house, those kids that are in the house with the new dad or the stepdad or the mommy's boyfriend are 100% or 100 times, I should say, more likely to be abused and or killed by the non-biological man that is now in the family as a result. That goes back to our evolutionary roots as primates, because that's exactly what chimps do. That's exactly what apes do. That's exactly what name the primate. Hell, even lions do the same thing. When a new alpha male comes into that pride of lions, the first thing he does is kill every last baby lion that was sired by the previous rival alpha. That has the effect of sending those females into estrus, so that they go into heat, right? So that they can produce more babies with the new alpha male. There's a very similar, now obviously in human societies where it's frowned upon to kill children. We understand that, but there's other ways we can sort of point out that dynamic in human beings by looking at certainly the mortality rates of children when a new male comes into that living situation. And then you can also look at, like, how both male and female favor their own biological children over the extended family's children as a result of that. Now, can we overcome that? Sure, we do. We can, and we do all the time. But the innate instinct is to favor our own biological children over our extended, like, non-biological children, and or the propensity to abuse those kids. So that's an ugly side of nature and evolution. But we have to face those facts, and we have to find some way to sort of process that in terms of, like, in the cost of humans, like cost of humanity, right? So I think that I agree with what you're saying about marriage, but I have always come out against the way that we do marriage now. I've been married for 25 years. I have a daughter who is 23 years old. I've been with my wife for 26 and a half years. And I firmly believe that marriage is a great institution And it's been the cornerstone, certainly Western societies, for centuries, if not, millennia. And it's been the best practice, I think, for forming families for a very long time. The problem is it's become an unconscionable contract in the West right now. It has become one of the worst decisions that a man can make in his lifetime right now, is to get legally married to a woman. Because what happens is you lose, well, first of all, the little amount of authority you actually have is gone, because when you enter into a marriage with women, it's an all downside risk for men. Now, granted, that depends on the society, but certainly in Western societies, in gynocentric social order, it is always going to favor the woman. The woman is incentivized to leave the relationship. That you want to know why 70% of divorces are initiated by
Family
women?
courts systems are
Divorce.
men's.
I mean, seriously, look at what's happened since the sexual revolution and the advent of hormonal birth control. We see the rise in divorce. We see the drop, a substantial drop in marriage. We see fertility rates plummet. We see divorce go up. We see the Duluth model of feminism. We see gynocentric legislation. We see Me Too. Yes, yes means yes. No means no. Arbitrary consent laws. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And it's like, who is not seeing the obvious thing that's right in front of your face right here? That's where it all went to hell, is at that point. Now, what caused that? Well, empowering women as a result of the fact that they have hormonal birth control right now, and they're essentially in control of the reproductive process of every human being on planet Earth right now. So we say, ladies, you are in control of reproduction. Where do we go from here? Well, apparently we go to marriage being the worst idea that you can have. We have polygamy. We have women in the workspace. We have women suggesting communitarian, socialist, so societal organizations. We have the highest unwed mother percentage. Was it 42% here in the United States? I just read recently in the UK they are saying that what is it? Is it 30% of women will in the UK or something like that? I believe are single and childless and will be.
Yeah. I have that graph as well.
I just saw that data. I need to dig into that. I might use that for my Sunday show. But I'm looking at that and I go, so that's another result. Here it is. This is the fruits of putting women into a position of power and giving them pretty much the unilateral control over the reproductive process. What happens? Men ain't shit. That's what happens. And men ain't going to, I'm not going to breed with them and I don't want anything but the best. Well, if that's the case, then we've got to institute laws in Hungary that say we need more babies. You'll get a tax break if you actually settle down, find a man, have babies, and we'll give you financial incentives to do so, because we fucked up for the last 6 years or 60 years. Because we've put women into positions of societal control as a result of the sexual revolution.
Yeah.
Anyways, okay, I gotta go.
Okay, Rollo, thank you for coming. Thank you for accepting my invitation. You were great. I hope we can hear each other.
Well, I'll promote this on my channel. This was a good talk. I'll make sure that everybody knows about it on my channel.
Okay, I'll send you when we go into montage and all. I'll send you the recording. Today, thank you.
Okay. Sounds good.
Goodbye.
All right, guys. I'll see you later. I'm going to bed.
Bye.
All right.
Good night.
Take it easy, guys. Bye-bye.